Howard Hughes once designed an entire piece of engineering, not for a plane, not for a machine, but for one actress's chest. That's how seriously old Hollywood took the female silhouette. Long before Instagram, before plastic surgery, before anyone had ever heard the word influencer, a handful of women turned their own bodies into cultural landmarks, powerful enough to launch careers, spark international scandals, and reshape what an entire generation considered beauty. Some of them used it to seize control of their own image. Others were nearly consumed by it entirely. Tonight, we count down 13 of old Hollywood's most iconic, most talked about figures, and the woman at the very end of this list is still, to this day, the single most recognizable silhouette in the history of cinema. Let's start with the actress, whose discovery came with a literal blueprint attached. In the 1960s, right as Hollywood was actively transitioning away from its earlier Golden Age bombshells, Raquel Welch burst dramatically onto the scene and proved decisively that the entire age of curves was genuinely far from over. Her now iconic image in a fur bikini from 1960 SXS, 1 million years BC, became one of the single most famous movie posters in all of cinematic history. Almost overnight, Welch wasn't simply a rising actress anymore. She instantly became a genuine global symbol recognized worldwide. Her figure was statuesque and athletic, yet still undeniably voluptuous, her overall silhouette perfectly accentuating a classic hourglass shape. Unlike so many stars who lean purely into passive glamour, Welch consistently exuded genuine physical strength instead. She was bold, fierce, and completely unapologetic about her own sensuality on screen. Her curves weren't simply there to be admired passively by audiences, they actively embodied real power and presence. But Raquel never let Hollywood reduce her entirely to just another pin-up image. She actively fought hard against being permanently typecast as merely the busted bombshell of her era. She deliberately chose demanding roles that required genuine grit, independence, and real resilience from her as a performer. Still, her figure remained genuinely impossible for interviewers and audiences alike to ever fully ignore. Interviews throughout her career often pressed her repeatedly about her body specifically, and Welch openly admitted the real emotional burden of being permanently labeled as a symbol rather than a full person. She once described being treated as a symbol as an especially heavy load to carry, particularly on days when she felt tired, hurt, or genuinely bewildered by the constant attention. Yet she carried that weight with real dignity throughout her long career, eventually becoming one of the rare actresses who successfully blended physical beauty with genuine personal independence. Welch proved strength and sensuality could coexist without conflict, but at the very top of this entire list stands a one figure whose silhouette didn't just define an era. It became the single most recognized image in the history of cinema itself. Jane Russell wasn't simply discovered by a Hollywood talent scout in some ordinary studio hallway. She was discovered by eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes himself, a man obsessed enough with her figure that he personally engineered a specially designed bra specifically to emphasize her famously full bust for her 1943 screen debut in The Outlaw. Russell later admitted, almost as an afterthought, that she actually never wore the thing. But by then, the scandal surrounding it had already done its job, launching her into instant, headline-grabbing fame before audiences had even seen a single frame of the actual film. With dark hair, razor-sharp wit, and a figure that turned heads in every room she entered, Jane became something Hollywood hadn't fully seen before, the original bad girl, all smoldering confidence instead of studio-manufactured sweetness. While countless other actresses of the era were packaged as innocent and demure, Russell was marketed as pure heat, her curves front and center in nearly every publicity photo released. But here's the twist most people miss. Jane Russell wasn't simply an image constructed entirely by men behind a desk. She controlled it herself, wielding her sharp humor and self-awareness like a genuine weapon. When she was paired opposite Marilyn Monroe in 1953's Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the contrast between the two women was electric, Monroe playful and blonde, Russell earthy and dark-haired, both equally voluptuous but commanding attention in completely different ways. Off-screen, Russell remained fiercely independent, refusing to simply bow to whatever Hollywood expected of her. Her body made her instantly famous, sure, but it was her sharp personality that made her genuinely unforgettable, ensuring she outlasted the very scandal that first launched her. Russell turned a manufactured scandal into a lasting career, but our next star's most famous scene wasn't scandalous at all. It was pure, unforgettable cinematic myth, staged in the middle of a Roman fountain. Anita Ekberg wasn't simply an actress. She was, quite literally, a cinematic event unto herself. Born in Sweden, she arrived in Hollywood after winning the Miss Sweden pageant in 1950, her tall frame and voluptuous figure instantly setting her apart from the carefully sculpted, more conventional studio starlets surrounding her. While plenty of actresses were celebrated simply for glamour, Ekberg's presence felt almost mythological in scale, commanding enough that directors didn't just cast her in scenes, they built entire scenes specifically around her. Her single most legendary moment came in Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita in 1960, when she waded straight into Rome's Trevi Fountain, wearing a flowing black gown, water cascading dramatically around her statuesque frame. It wasn't simply a film scene at that point. It became visual poetry, instantly recognized worldwide, and remains one of the most referenced images in the entire history of cinema decades later. Hollywood frequently cast her in roles that leaned heavily on her physical presence, yet Ekberg embraced the attention with genuine confidence rather than discomfort. She knew exactly what kind of force she represented, and she wielded it with playfulness rather than apology. She wasn't the shy ingenue type Hollywood usually favored. She was bold, towering, and impossible to look away from once she entered a scene. Critics of the era often dismissed her actual acting talent, focusing entirely on her physical presence instead, but history ultimately remembers the image regardless, the eternal fountain goddess, forever tied to one unforgettable night in Rome. Hollywood didn't shape Anita Ekberg into something marketable. She simply arrived fully formed, and the entire industry bent itself around her instead. Ekberg became a living monument almost by accident, but our next star's fame came with genuine tragedy attached, a spectacle so enormous it nearly overshadowed a startlingly high IQ hiding underneath it. If Hollywood ever needed a high priestess of pure spectacle, it was Jane Mansfield. She wasn't simply well known for her figure, she became something closer to legendary. Arriving in an era when Marilyn Monroe had already set the gold standard for bombshell beauty, Mansfield showed up like an actual thunderclap, threatening to eclipse everyone around her with a bust line so dramatic it seemed to belong more to myth than to reality. Studios marketed her physical measurements, famously reported as 40-21-35, as part of an entire publicity machine built around her. Tabloids salivated constantly over her plunging necklines, her infamous wardrobe malfunctions, and her sheer, audacious confidence. Wherever she went, genuine chaos seemed to follow closely behind, flashbulbs popping, headlines screaming, fans gasping, in real time. Mansfield knew precisely what she was doing the entire time. She leaned hard into the ultimate bombshell persona, rivaling Monroe directly, but pushing everything even further. If Marilyn represented sensuality wrapped in softness, Jane represented sensuality wrapped in fire, loud, daring, and completely impossible to ignore. But here's what almost nobody expected. Mansfield was also genuinely, seriously intelligent, with a reported IQ above 150. She was classically trained in piano and fluently spoke multiple languages. Hollywood, though, never once allowed her to fully escape the mold of the busted blonde bombshell it had already built around her image. Even so, she wielded that persona with real cunning, stretching it into a career-spanning film, stage performance, and endless, relentless publicity. Her story ended tragically in a devastating 1967 car accident when she was only 34 years old. But by that point, her legend had already been permanently sealed into Hollywood history. Mansfield's spectacle ended in real tragedy, but our next entry proved that genuine freedom, not studio control, could build an icon just as powerful and lasting. She wasn't a Hollywood studio darling. She wasn't even technically a typical actress at all. And yet Betty Page became one of the most enduring icons to emerge from the 1950s, her figure rivaling and often genuinely surpassing the studio-manufactured screen sirens of her exact time period. With jet black bangs, a radiant smile, and curves that quite literally carved out modern pinup history, Page redefined an entire generation's idea of femininity. Unlike so many actresses locked tightly into restrictive Hollywood contracts, Betty had something rare: genuine freedom. Freedom to pose, to play, and to let her figure speak louder than any censorship code of the era could contain. Her daring photographs, ranging from playful bikini shots to considerably more risque lingerie work, scandalized conservative audiences of the time, while simultaneously liberating an entire generation of women watching from the sidelines. She embodied fearless sensuality during a period when women were routinely told to shrink themselves down, both physically and socially. Her well-endowed, confidently displayed frame wasn't her only real gift, though. It was her genuine courage to flaunt it entirely unapologetically that ultimately made her immortal in pop culture. Even after she eventually stepped away from modeling entirely, her cultural influence only continued growing over the following decades. Fashion designers, musicians, and feminists alike would go on to claim her as a genuine muse for their own work. Betty Page wasn't a Hollywood invention at all. She was entirely her own creation, built from nothing but confidence and a willingness to be seen exactly as she was. Today, she's remembered less as a simple 1950s starlet and more as a quiet cultural revolution, draped unmistakably in jet black bangs. Page proved a woman could own her own image completely, but our next star's iconic scene involved barely revealing anything at all, and it still managed to scandalize an entire nation. Before Monroe, before Mansfield, there was Rita Hayworth, the original love goddess of Hollywood's golden age. With flame-red hair, smoldering eyes, and an hourglass figure carefully sculpted by the studio system into pure legend, Rita became the dream of millions throughout the 1940s. Her figure, consistently accentuated by sleek gowns and fitted bodices, created a silhouette that remains genuinely unforgettable today. Her defining breakthrough came in Gilda, where she performed the now-iconic glove striptease sequence. She didn't reveal much of anything, really, just the slow, deliberate removal of a single glove. But paired with her striking figure and command of the camera, the moment became genuinely electrifying. Audiences swooned, censors panicked, and Rita Hayworth instantly cemented herself as the decade's ultimate symbol of desire on screen. Yet behind that glamorous facade was a woman who had been fundamentally reshaped by Hollywood's own rigid demands. Born Margarita Cancino, she was pressured relentlessly to change her name, dye her naturally dark hair, and even alter her physical appearance to better fit an all-American studio mold. Her natural figure, however, simply couldn't be erased or diminished. It became her defining, lasting weapon of immortality instead. Rita's presence wasn't simply decorative. It genuinely helped shape cinema's entire visual language around sensuality itself, proving that real allure came from presence and suggestion rather than explicit exposure. But Rita herself often felt genuinely trapped inside that constructed image, once painfully admitting that men went to bed dreaming of Gilda, but woke up disappointed to find only her ordinary self instead, a confession that laid bare the real gap between Hollywood fantasy and lived reality. Hayworth's silhouette became eternally etched into film history, but our next star turned that exact same formula upside down, using her body and her scientific mind simultaneously, in ways almost nobody around her ever fully understood. Hedy Lamarr wasn't simply one of the most beautiful women to ever grace Hollywood's golden age screens. She was genuinely a paradox, pure allure fused directly with real intellect. Born Hedwig Kiesler in Vienna, she stunned European audiences early on with her audacious 1933 performance in Ecstasy, where her striking beauty and figure first caught the attention of the entire world. Hollywood came calling almost immediately afterward, and Hedy Lamarr quickly became the definitive emblem of the exotic bombshell archetype. With raven hair, luminous skin, and a figure that seemed sculpted directly from classical statuary, she was widely hailed at the time as the single most beautiful woman in the world. But it wasn't just her face that mesmerized audiences and directors alike. Her figure, often showcased deliberately in slinky gowns and daring necklines, made her an instant favorite among directors hoping to translate raw sensuality directly into cinematic poetry on screen. Yet behind the curves and the sultry on-screen gaze was a genuinely sharp scientific mind that rivaled her physical beauty entirely. Few people at the time realized that this celebrated bombshell was also secretly a working scientist, co-inventing frequency-hopping technology during World War II, a real technical breakthrough that eventually became the foundational basis for modern Wi-Fi and Bluetooth technology decades later. While studios were busy marketing her purely as a sensual seductress, Lamarr was quietly, privately reshaping the technological future of the entire modern world behind the scenes. She once famously quipped with obvious bitterness that any girl could easily be glamorous, since all she really had to do was stand still and look stupid, a pointed line clearly aimed directly at a Hollywood system that valued her body endlessly while almost entirely ignoring her genuine brilliance. Lamarr hid genuine genius behind her glamour her entire career, but our next star proudly declared herself something even bigger than a mere movie star, an entire planet in her own words. When Gina Lollobrigida entered a room, the entire world seemed to tilt in her direction. Born in Italy and affectionately nicknamed Lolo, she embodied a specific kind of Mediterranean sensuality that Hollywood genuinely hadn't seen before her arrival. With an unmistakable hourglass figure and a presence that drew just as much attention as her dazzling magnetic smile, she became one of the most sought-after stars working throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s. Her career actually began in European cinema, where her figure and magnetic screen presence proved impossible for audiences to ignore from the very start. Films like 1953's Bread, Love, and Dreams revealed her natural sensuality early on, and Hollywood soon imported that same allure into films opposite major stars like Frank Sinatra and Rock Hudson. Gina's figure wasn't simply celebrated at the time. It became something closer to legend, drawing endless comparisons throughout her career to her closest rival, Sophia Loren. But Gina was never merely a body on display for the cameras. She was witty, genuinely intelligent, and fiercely ambitious in her own right. When once directly asked about her considerable beauty, she famously declared that she wasn't simply a star. She was an entire planet, orbiting Hollywood entirely on her own terms, refusing outright to ever be overshadowed by anyone else in the industry. Directors consistently adored filming her in close, lingering frames, treating her almost as living art in motion. But Gina carefully balanced glamour with real substance, later reinventing herself successfully as a working journalist and photographer, even landing and conducting an interview with Fidel Castro at one point in her career. Lalo Brigida proved beauty and genuine ambition could coexist perfectly, but our next star used that exact same Mediterranean allure to win something no bombshell reputation alone could ever buy: a genuine Academy Award. Sophia Loren wasn't simply an actress. She was, in every real sense, an entire empire built around beauty, a genuine Mediterranean goddess whose very presence in a room made the world around her pause and take notice. Born in Italy, she brought with her a completely natural sensuality that defied Hollywood's usual carefully engineered archetypes entirely. Where American studios typically manufactured curves through costume and camera tricks, Sophia simply lived hers, effortlessly and without artifice. Her figure, full and genuinely statuesque, became the very embodiment of European allure for an entire generation of moviegoers. She once famously joked that everything people saw when they looked at her, she owed entirely to spaghetti. But her figure was never truly an accident of diet. It was her inheritance, her natural gift, and ultimately her own personal source of power in an industry that often tried to control women's bodies for them. Directors adored working with her, audiences worshipped her on screen, and major magazines repeatedly declared her the most beautiful woman alive during her prime years. In films like 1958's Houseboat, alongside Cary Grant, and 1960's Two Women, which actually earned her a well-deserved Academy Award, Loren consistently combined genuine sensuality with real, undeniable acting talent. Her figure was admired, certainly, but it was celebrated specifically because it never once overshadowed the depth and humanity she consistently brought to every single role she took on. Unlike so many bombshells of her era, who found themselves permanently typecast, Loren balanced her natural allure with genuine dignity, commanding real respect as both a skilled actress and as an independent woman in her own right. She made curves synonymous with elegance rather than mere spectacle, refusing entirely to apologize for her figure while still being taken seriously as a genuine artist. Loren proved elegance and sensuality could coexist without contradiction. But our next star proved something else entirely: that a woman could build her entire persona on her own terms, decades before that kind of independence was even remotely acceptable. Before Marilyn Monroe ever whispered about diamonds, and long before Jane Mansfield made headlines with plunging necklines, there was Mae West, the original queen of curves, sass, and genuine scandal. In the 1930s, back when Hollywood was still figuring out how to balance basic morality with entertainment value, Mae West strutted confidently across the silver screen and simply rewrote the entire rulebook on her own terms. Her figure was genuinely impossible for audiences or censors to ignore: voluptuous, confident, and entirely unapologetically sensual. Unlike so many actresses forced to conform tightly to rigid studio standards of the era, West leaned directly into her own figure instead, turning it into a stage prop nearly as famous as her razor-sharp one-liners. She never needed male approval to validate her curves. She simply weaponized them herself on her own terms. "When I'm good, I'm very good," she famously quipped, "but when I'm bad, I'm better." Those words came to define her entire public brand, an irreverent, fearless celebration of feminine power at a time when almost nobody else dared to claim it so openly. Hollywood's censors genuinely despised her for it, but ordinary audiences adored her completely regardless. She personally wrote many of her own films, crafting characters who were every bit as witty as they were physically striking on screen. Her figure was never simply there to be passively admired by audiences. It was there specifically to command attention and respect. Every gown she wore, every deliberate sway of her hips, functioned as a calculated performance of total control over her own narrative. She didn't just enter a scene quietly. She dominated it entirely, letting her curves do just as much talking as her genuinely sharp dialogue ever did. West proved a woman could be entirely self-made in an industry built to control her, but across the Atlantic, another blonde bombshell was busy proving that Britain could produce its very own version of Marilyn Monroe, with fully intact. They called her the British Marilyn Monroe, but Diana Dors was genuinely no mere imitation of anyone else. She was a force entirely her own. With platinum hair, a mischievous, knowing smile, and a figure that consistently generated tabloid headlines on both sides of the Atlantic, she lit up British cinema throughout the 1950s and eventually stormed across the ocean with a boldness that genuinely startled even seasoned Hollywood executives. Her curves functioned as her crown, her overall silhouette serving as a genuine weapon of charm wherever she appeared publicly. Dors fully embraced the bombshell image assigned to her, often leaning directly into it with tight-fitting dresses, deliberately sultry poses, and film roles that openly flaunted her natural physical assets. She understood exactly the game Hollywood and the British press were both playing with her image, and unlike many of her contemporaries, she leaned into it with a knowing wink and a confident smirk, fully aware of the real cultural power her figure carried. But Diana was never simply a walking hourglass figure, and nothing more. She was genuinely witty, remarkably sharp-tongued, and completely unafraid to jab directly back at the very industry that consistently objectified her for profit. In interviews throughout her career, she openly mocked the exact stereotype she inhabited publicly, proving decisively that she was every bit as intellectually sharp as she was physically striking. Her overall presence was magnetic enough that she frequently didn't even need Hollywood's formal approval to succeed. Britain had already crowned her its own undisputed queen of curves well before America ever fully caught on to her appeal. Dors owned her image completely rather than hiding from it, but our next star didn't simply own her image either. She used it to ignite an entire cultural rebellion, arriving from France with curves that toppled old-fashioned notions of propriety altogether. Before Hollywood's carefully manufactured bombshells ever fully took hold of the public imagination, France gave the entire world Brigitte Bardot, a genuine vision of sensual freedom unlike anything audiences had seen before. Emerging onto the scene in the 1950s, Bardot didn't simply walk into the spotlight quietly. She ignited it entirely on her own terms. With tousled blonde hair, lips that seemed to dare the camera to look away, and a figure that redefined the very concept of desire for an entire generation, she reshaped European cinema and permanently infiltrated Hollywood's collective imagination as well. Her genuine breakthrough came in 1950's XS and God Created Woman, a film that shocked international audiences with its raw, entirely unapologetic sensuality. Bardot wasn't shy, and she certainly wasn't manufactured by any studio machine behind the scenes. She radiated a completely natural allure that toppled old, rigid notions of feminine propriety almost overnight. Her figure was frequently framed in off-the-shoulder dresses or simple swimsuits, functioning as a genuine visual manifesto for personal liberation. She wasn't simply celebrated in body alone, but in spirit as well, genuinely embodying an entire generation of young people who longed to break free from conservative social shackles still holding much of society back at the time. Hollywood already had Marilyn and Jane by this point in cultural history, but Europe had Bardot, a woman who simply refused to play by anyone else's established studio rules. Even after she chose to retire from acting relatively young, Bardot's cultural influence only continued to grow steadily over the following decades. Her image became genuinely synonymous with the entire concept of sensuality itself in popular culture. She didn't merely star in films throughout her career, she turned her own figure into cinema's most naturally striking spectacle. Bardot's rebellion made her eternal in pop culture. But our next star fought a very different battle entirely, proving that real physical strength and genuine feminine power could coexist on screen without contradiction.